Welcome to the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast, where we explore the unexplained and mysterious phenomena that have occurred throughout the state of Michigan and beyond.
From UFO sightings to ghostly encounters, we delve deep into the stories, the evidence, and the theories behind these strange events.
We are your hosts. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Wayne.
We are an educator duo that after an encounter with a triangular UFO in 2018 in Michigan, we decided to investigate UFOs and the paranormal. In this podcast, we will be speaking with eyewitnesses, experts, and researchers to uncover the truth about some of the most intriguing cases of paranormal activity in and around Michigan.
Our goal is not to convince anyone of the existence of these phenomena, but rather to provide a platform for discussion and exploration. So, buckle up and join us on this journey down the paranormal rabbit hole.
On an escalator.
Okay, hello everyone, and we are coming to you from the shadow of the great Motor City, Detroit, Michigan, and we want to welcome you to another episode of the Michigan UFO Sightings and Paranormal Encounters podcast. It is Sunday, November 2nd. Michelle, it's already November.
I can't get over the fact that it's already November.
And we are back with a vengeance. So last weekend, we did not record a show because we went to visit Benny Fogan and his family to see and inspect the alien metal for ourselves. They also took us on a small tour of the amazing area where all of these encounters with UFOs and alien Bigfoot took place. And all I can say is it was quite the experience.
And I survived Columbus, Ohio, wearing all Michigan gear. So
yeah. Now that was very interesting. That was a paranormal
That's
experience.
A whole different story.
Yeah. So very interesting, especially when the cook of the restaurant we were at for dinner came up and stood next to you, staring at you.
Down. I got the stare down.
And then he proceeded to say, "Well, I used to live in Detroit, so yeah,
it's like I was saved."
So, so we have some great pictures and of what's left of the alien metal that Benny has, and a recording of something that happened with Benny and his family that they never talked about before. So we're cleaning up that audio and we're going to be releasing that next weekend. So make sure you guys are here for that.
We're going to tell you all about the trip.
Yeah. Next weekend, we're going to talk all about the trip, show you some pictures and everything, and then talk about what our plans are going to be going back down there in the future. Probably springtime, but we'll get more into that. So next live show. So be here for that. It's going to be an interesting show and some interesting topics to discuss next weekend. So with that being said, Michelle, tell us about our guest tonight.
Hey, tonight we're joined by the world's leading expert on alien abductions, Derrel Sims. He has 38 plus years of field research that has focused on physical evidence and led to his groundbreaking discoveries of alien implants and alien fluorescence. As a former military police officer and CIA operative, Sims has a unique insight to the alien organization, which he believes functions similarly to an intelligence agency. Sims is also a compassionate and skilled therapist who has helped hundreds of alien experiencers all over the world come to terms with what they've witnessed. So let's bring him on for his first appearance on the show, Derrel Sims.
Hey, Derrel.
Well, hello, Michelle, and you guys are awesome. I've listened to you several times when you were not aware of that, and very impressed with your forthrightness. It's a good program. Excellent.
Well, thank you for coming out tonight to join us and have a nice conversation.
Yeah. So, Derrel, I want to kind of kick things off with you went from being the hunted to the hunter after these entities went after your son. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience and what changed for you afterwards?
Certainly. The short version of my story is that I was a captive audience at age 4. My abduction experiences started at age 4 in Midland, Texas, and I remembered my event very clearly, and never had hypnosis or any other memory recovery techniques to recover the information. 99% of my information comes from the fact that I have conscious memory of the event. Anyway, in a nutshell, and this is kind of important, I think, for your audience, because this is some of the things I'm going to mention may ring some bells for witnesses that have not come forward and think that they may be a little bit weird because their experiences are a little different than other people's, and that hopefully mine will help them in that regard. From my point of view, I don't care whether anybody believes my events or not. It's irrelevant to me. It just happened, and that's all there is to it. And I would not waste 38 years. That's easily that many. 38 years of my life chasing something that doesn't exist. There's too much evidence out there right now to point to all that. So basically, here's the story. Age 4, I was, and this is really important, the words that I use, the people that are interested in this need to pay attention carefully to these words. I was not woke up. I was switched on. And I realized there's someone standing in my room in Midland, Texas, 1005 South K Street, when I was 4 years old, 1952. And I can't figure out who that is and and I get a good look at him. He's got large black eyes, a large bulbous head, and he's a little taller than I am. I'm only 4 years old. And the interesting thing, kids see things differently than adults. Adults say things like, "Oh, it was an alien from another world, from Zeta Reticuli or wherever." That's not what kids say. They they tell you the truth of what they're looking at. What I saw was somebody with large black eyes that had a tiny slit for a mouth, little tiny pinholes for a nose, and had no ears. And of course, as a 4-year-old kid, I'm wondering, since it's wintertime, where is his clothes? Cold. I mean, common sense stuff. And he didn't have any clothes. And I of course started from the chin, from the lips on down, realized he didn't have any nipples whatsoever. And I thought, well, that's weird. I do. And I looked further, and he didn't have a belly button. That's weird. I do. Then I looked and noticed that he didn't have a TT. That's what kids would call it. And that just floored me. Who is this guy with no clothes in freezing weather in my room, in my house? None of it made any sense. And as I was looking at all this, it realized I was looking it over pretty close. And I heard the most incredible thing in my head. I'd never, ever heard a voice in my head other than me talking to myself. And it said, "It's awake." And at that point, I realized it's talking to somebody else, and it's not me. So this was real disconcerting to me, and something that'd be important for your listeners to pick up on here if they need this information. Is number one, something happened in my event when I was age 4 that I've rarely ever heard anyone ever mention, and that is that for some reason, I don't know whether I don't know why the rationale happened, why it occurred, but I could overhear him talking to someone else. Now, generally speaking, they talk to you or tell you it's okay, you won't remember, whatever whopper they're going to tell you. It won't hurt, all kinds of things like that. But the problem was that I could listen to them talking, communicating to each other. In other words, think of it like this, like when a president is saying something, or like the time Obama was talking to the president of Putin. He said, "We'll get that taken care of whenever I get my reelection." That he was hot mic'd and nobody knew it. The hot mic, it just means that they don't realize that you're still hearing that.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. And in my I've had about 10 events. For my events ended at age 17, and I've been able to hot mic them ever since. So the reason I've learned so much about the alien isn't because I'm smart or because I read everybody's stuff, because I don't. It's because I have personal experiences and I actually heard what they're saying. What they say and are saying to each other is not what they're telling you. It's a total different story. We have no clue, in my opinion, other than our guesswork or what we assume that we know about this sort of thing. They have their own agenda. And so that was real important to let your audience know that hot micing can exist, and it may have happened to someone else. I don't know. The second thing is that the first thing they tried on me, when he realized I was listening to him, he formed this image of a clown. And he made me think I was looking at a terrifying looking clown, and he was going to use that as my screen image to make me think I had a bad dream. Well, you don't understand. I'm already listening to him telling somebody they're discussing all this, and I already know what they're doing. And so I don't have to wonder. And I kept shaking my little head, no, 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 because I wanted to remember him for what he was, not for what he wanted me to think he was. And the next morning when I woke up, I was back in bed, covers all made up perfectly, laid out. It wasn't, my mother didn't even make them like that. So somebody did a pretty good job to make me think that nothing had happened. My parents saw me the next morning, and I was visibly upset, and I wouldn't tell them why. I never did until my mother passed away about 2 years ago, and she asked me to tell her what happened, and I told her, and she said, "Well, I know you're an investigator, but I didn't. But they said you're an abductee," and I said, "Well, I actually am, Mom." And she said, "Well, why did you not tell us?" And that's because of that dumb-looking Boo Radley look you got on your face right now. I said I did not want to deal with that at age 4. So the second event happened, believe it or not, the next night, which is extremely unusual for an event to happen 2 in a week or one after another. And my parents saw that I was really upset, and they did something they've never, ever done in the history of my life. They put me between them at age 4 because they felt like I was so upset I should, going to have a bad dream. And again, I was almost like switched on, realized something's wrong. And I looked up, and there were 2 of them standing at the end of her mom's and dad's bed. And they looked exactly identical. But the weird thing is, if there were 1,000 of them standing side by side, I could tell you who my handler was. I don't know how I know it, but I can identify him quicker than anything. And these guys all look the same to me. But you can actually tell who your handler is. That's the one. I call him the cosmic pizza delivery guy. And we're the pizza. He gets to deliver us.
Well, I want to interrupt you for a moment. When you were 4, and this goes back to like the idea that you were just saying, like how he wanted you to see a clown. And there's been a lot of talk of that these things like use mental telepathy to read our minds to present an image that we want to see them as, that they will not make us upset, right? They're gonna show you something that's gonna seem normal, not a little gray alien. And I was talking to Benny about this, about the Bigfoot situation and the little Bigfoot that he has, and then the big ones. And I was like, do you think that they were maybe trying to show you something that you were familiar with or that you heard about in a paranormal sense? But at age 4, have you ever, at that time, did you ever hear of any little gray aliens, or at that age that they could be showing you that instead?
No. 1952, there were no alien movies on or things like that. The
Yeah.
closest thing they had to a scary movie TV show back then was called Inner Sanctum, and that was my parents didn't let us just sit around and watch that stuff anyway. That was pretty scary for little kids. I had no idea what in the world I was looking at. I have no idea. I just knew there's something seriously wrong with this picture. And then when he made that image of of course, I was overhearing what he's saying, telling this other guys, telling whoever else was in the room that I didn't see. And by the way, this shows up on the craft too. A lot of times when people are taken on board a craft, whenever I work with them, I'll ask questions. How many were there? Well, there are 3 standing here and 2 at my feet. That sort of thing. They go into real interesting descriptions. And I'll ask questions. You have to get inside the abductee's mind, having been an abductee, because you know there's something else there. And I ask the question without leading them, is there anyone else there that you don't see? And they'll look at me, it's so strange. Yeah, the one hiding over there behind the wall. Well, why is he hiding and who is he? He's basically often is the boss. And for some reason, they don't want to be seen. They'll hide themselves. But they do use imagery. One of the things we discovered several years ago was, of course, you hear the imagery a lot. You know, like a child, a baby will in a crib will say, well, when they came in, you know, I saw the furry little a giraffe and or a little zebra or something, a furry little animal. And what's really strange about this, when you pin this stuff down, some of these people end up being furries later in their life. You know what I mean? They go to these furry conferences, they dress up with these animal, a lot of them very similar animals that they were the screen memory of. And anyway, it's just a little sidebar. There's rather interesting, but they use.
Do you think maybe that's by design?
I do, but generally they look through your brain and see what it's about manipulation. It's about control. And if they can control you and manipulate you, then if they can do it on that level, then they can do it on psychological levels for other things they want to do. There are basically only 3 kinds of people that enter in these experiences. The first one is people who have been taken and don't know it. These are rare. There may be a lot of people like that, but I've worked with some people that swore to me, engineers and others that swore to me they never had an experience, never. And just friends of mine, and almost called me a liar, you know, even thinking that. I said, but you got 33 out of 35 of our main points of contact. And well, I don't care. I mean, that's just weird. That doesn't make any sense. I said, well, okay. 2 years later, they show up. I work with them, and they tell me that they're later breaking out crying, telling the event. I mean, just this is impossible. This can't have happened. And they remember every event. The scars on them, marks. I'll tell where they came from. I mean, in great detail. So the bottom line, again, for me, and this is that's one group. The second group are people who get taken, like me, and become an abductee. In other words, you were abducted. You weren't visited, you were abducted, and which is in some states is still against the law. So the abduction experience is considered violent or immoral or whatever by people of my ilk. And then you've got a third group of people who are people that are taken, but they are convinced, in my opinion, by the alien that they're here to save the planet, fix the ozone hole, or do some wonderful things for humanity.
Oh man,
upgrade your DNA, whatever whopper you want to buy into, and a lot of people buy into that. A lot of people do.
Yeah. The Star brothers and sisters that are here to save everybody. Well, why haven't they done it already then?
That's exactly what I asked them. When are they going to do it? And they tell me, well, these are time travelers from another. I said, listen to me. I said, I was born in Texas and I was born at night, but it wasn't last night. And I said, the problem is with time travel, these guys coming back to repair everything and make it all better. Why didn't they do that 1,000 years ago? Why are they late? Why
Yeah,
are we
do you think?
why are we remembering all of this?
Yeah, I think about that and I go, they could have started with the poor guy that they hung up on the cross 2,000 years ago.
Yeah,
You
the only,
know,
the only problem with him is that if you study this stuff, which if we have time, we'll get into it. If you study this UFO phenomena, the history of it, I mean, way back to Sumerian literature, Warkan literature, the Bible, the Torah, when you can look at all of it and you piece it together instead of consider one thing one thing and one another, and you look at it and you look at it from an evidentiary viewpoint, especially with scholarship, it's absolutely astounding the things you can put together because you already have a history in the past. You just have to be able to look back and see where it actually occurred and what really happened. So anyway, the bottom line is that this whole thing is about it's manipulation. Valet, Keel, many other people say that and have for many years. But the thing is that I don't care to prove to people or get them to buy into whatever I'm saying. I'm
exactly.
just about evidence, and the evidence is overwhelming to me from what I've found in all these years, and I just don't. I wish everybody the best, and if you want to believe they came here to save the planet and fix those on hold, that's fine. I just like to know when they're going to get started.
Yeah. But getting back to your son, what happened with your son or with your experience that made you want to flip the script on these guys and start going after them, whatever they may be?
Well, this is probably what's going to get me in a little bit of trouble with some of the UFO folks out there because
Oh,
they read so many books and things, and so they think that whatever I'm reading, that's the way it all happens, and it may not necessarily be that way.
hmm.
So my events went on for 13 years. At age 17, I had my last visitation, if people want to call it that, and the 5 entities that showed up were not the alien. In my opinion, the alien, the reptile, all these different ones, the mantis, even Bigfoot, and so on. There's 7 primary ones that are talked about in the literature, are made, hatched, cloned, and manufactured for the purpose of making people think those are aliens from another planet. And the ones who made, hatched, cloned, and manufactured them, so to speak, 5 of them showed up in my room when I was 17. They're not the alien. I guarantee you they're not. And the alien couldn't stay in their presence. I mean, these guys are powerful, they're effective, and anyway, it was a horrific event. Some people said, in fact, my girlfriend at the time, I told her about it the next day, about some of it, and she looked at me and said, "You've had a terrible, terrible dream." And so we went to visit a friend of mine who's studied UFOs with me. He was my high school psychology teacher, and he listened to it, and his eyes were as big as saucers. Look, I mean, he was horrified because he knew I'd never lie and I'd never make anything up. He said, "You've had a terrible, terrible dream." And at that point, I dropped her like a hot potato, and we weren't going to get married. And I dropped him as a friend. That's it. When I tell people the truth, and they stand there and tell me I've had a terrible dream, and that they know what that automatically is, and I know better because my dad came in the room the next morning and found my door had been kicked in from the hallway inside. My dad and mom sleep right next door in the next bedroom. Nobody heard that entire door get kicked, and the lock broke off, with laying in the floor with the door broken. My dad got up in the morning and looked at me and said, "Son, you sure are rough on these doors." I said, "Yes, sir," because I didn't want to answer any questions. And for some bizarre reason, like he was programmed, he didn't even ask. And I fixed the door as best I could. But the reason I told that story is because when my son was 6 years old, my wife and I were asleep in bed about 2:30 in the morning on Meyer Road out there where the Cash Lantern case happened. We lived right down the street from it.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And anyway, I sat up in the bed immediately and ran as fast as I could down the hallway because I knew my son wasn't in his room. I knew that because people who have enough of these experiences and are conscious enough about that, you know when they're there, you know. And ran past his bedroom because I knew he wasn't in. I knew my daughter was in her room. She was not taken. I ran into in our ranch house into the dining room area, and my son was standing there, 6 years old, looking out the back window. I watched him for quite a while. He was in a deep trance, and I said, and he did not sleepwalk then. He didn't that night. He never has since. And I said, David, what are you looking at? He said, the little red light. And of course, there is no little red light out there. That's a control mechanism. And because they undoubtedly heard me getting up, they boogied. So I looked at him for quite a while, and my wife walked in, and you got to understand, I'd never told her anything, nothing. And she looks at him and looks at me and says, what's going on? So jig is up. I got caught. So I told her that about my events in general and that they had just gotten David. And I said, David, go back to sleep. He went back in his room, went to sleep. And he and my wife and my daughter begged me to work with him and find out what had happened. I already knew what had happened, and I didn't want to know. I did not want to know the details because not only did the alien come and get him, but one of those 5 entities was present as well. And when he described that, I mean, he was just mortified because these are not the alien. I guarantee you, if you ever see one, I've got 8 people I've met in the entire UFO community that have met one of these 5. Every one of them have got a permanent disability as a result. Everything from epilepsy to you name it. I mean, I just anyway. The big story about my son, to finish him up, is that unbeknownst to me, my son, 6 years old, designed a crossbow, and was a bow hunter. And he had my broadhead arrows, razorhead arrows, set inside the crossbow, aimed at the door of his room. So if somebody came in there again the next night, they were going to get an arrow right through the stomach. And of course, I was mortified when I heard this. I said, that David, your sister could have walked in there, any of us, you know. He was that terrified of what might happen the next night. I knew exactly what he was thinking because I went through the same exact thing, not with the alien. I never had a problem with being horrified or terrified of the alien. I could deal with them. It's the other guys. They're not like anything. It's a different story. And when I found that one of those characters had come back and got my son, I figured that's it. You know, you can come after me. I can deal with it. I'm a big guy, you know, I'll figure it out. You know, ex martial arts guy, you know, 4th degree black belt and all this kind of stuff, and private investigator and a cop and all the whole 9 yards. You know, I've been in the CIA for 3 years, and so I'll take care of it. But when you come after my children, you made a huge mistake because I'll hunt you down if it takes me to the end of my life. I want to know who you are, what you are, why you're doing it, and why there's these 2 huge sets of you. One's the alien group that people report all the time, and then the others, which I've only met 8 people that have actually met the others. Of course, I get letters from people all the time. Oh, Derrel, we know all about that. I've had the same experiences as you. I said, really? Well, that's great. Why don't you describe them to me? Well, they wear white robes and they were all in a big table at the big council of the wise. And I said, sorry for, you know, thank you for playing. You lose. I said, they're not anything like that. They're not anything you're going to make up and describe. It's not going to work. They don't look like aliens. They don't look like anything like that. So that was the big problem with me and my son. I had to. I got really upset with one of those guys showing up in the event.
Yeah. Well, you had wrote on your website as well. And by the way, everybody, you can find him at thealienhunter.com. Just so you guys want to check out his website and get in touch with him, you can email him on his website. But you write on there at the end of one of your lines, you say, "You're not undetectable, and I think I can prove it." How do you believe these entities are detected or can
Oh,
be detected?
they can be detected a number of different ways. And this will get a little involved, so I don't want to do that because it just it's minutia of getting into different levels of your consciousness, human consciousness, and them. But the simple version of it is that the alien is, like I'd mentioned, as many abductees sense when the alien's coming. I had a daughter-in-law that was so terrified. She came from Brazil to get away from the alien. She came, visited, stayed with us, and the long and the short of that is, one day she got real scared, and I said, "Well, what in the world? What is the problem?" And she said, she's shaking. She said, "Well, oh, oh, they're coming." I said, "Who?" And she said, "The aliens." And I said, "You left Brazil to get away from that?" She said, "Yes, but they always come on the third month, the third day, at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 times in a row." And so they did the first night, apparently. And that's why she was crying the next morning. Said the alien used the identification of one of my friends who I trusted, a guy named Jimmy, and she called them the Jimmies because she described him as the alien, but they used the word Jimmy because he was a friend of mine, so they thought that would work on her, and it didn't. So the first night, she had picked up a piece of stove wood and was going to hit it and defend herself, and it freaked out and it left. It went back through the wall. So the next day, this actually goes to part of what I'm talking about sensing, knowing things about them, and the ways one of the ways you can detect them. The second night, she said she started crying. Second evening, she started crying because she said they're going to come back, and I said, "Well, that's all right. I'll be awake. I'll be ready, and I'd like to meet them anyway. It's been a while." So I was in my room, and about 2 in the morning, I was working on my computer, and I said I was getting ready to go in there and wait for them while she was asleep on the floor. She has made a little bed there that she slept on, and I prayed about it, and I thought, if they're coming 3 times, why in the world would you waste these other 2 times? Why don't you experiment? Why do the confrontation last? Do something else. So I thought that'd be cool. I'll pray about it. We'll see if something happens. And I did, and the greatest peace that passes all understanding came to me and said, "She'll be all right." And I was like, okay. So I went to bed. Next morning, she's in tears, crying. "Ooh." And she said, "You didn't show up." And I said, "That's right. You're absolutely right. I did not. I didn't show up. And I said, "So what happened?" And she said, "I'm not crying because they came. I'm crying because it's so good." I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "It's really weird." She said, "The alien came through the wall again, and I picked up stove wood, and like I was going to hit him, and then she said something else came through the wall that was so evil." She said, I shook and dropped the stove wood. She said, I did not know things like that could exist more than the alien. And she said, and I said, and then she was crying, saying all this. And I said, "Then what happened?" She said, "Something strange happened. It was wonderful." I said, "What happened?" She said, "An angel came through the wall. And when he did," she said, both of them could not stay in the same room with that angelic being. She said, "Why did the angel came?" I said, "I don't know. Just take a wild guess here. I don't know." I did pray about it, and I said, and I had this revelation that you would be fine. And she said, "Well, it was." I said, "Doesn't matter. Night number 3, they're coming back. I'll be awake. I don't care I don't care if God shows up. I'm going to be there in that room with you. I will be there. She said, wonderful. So she's laying there asleep, 2:30 in the morning, and I'm sitting there with my Japanese sword, razor sharp, had over $1,000 work done on the blade alone. You could shave with it. It's that sharp. And I'm sitting there with a little smile waiting. And then, this is funny. She sits up. She's scared to death. 2:45 in the morning. She says, "Oh my God!" And I said, "Go back to sleep. I'm here." What she's doing when she's doing that, having that feeling, she's sensing when they're there. Abductees, you can be trained to do that. They are detectable in that sense. Said, "Go back to sleep. It's okay. I'm here. I won't leave." And at 3, I swear, 3 o'clock in the morning, right on the button, she sets up in slow motion in a deep trance, looks over at me and says, "They know you're here." And I said, "Yeah, but now they know that I know that they know that I know that they know that I'm here." And I said, "One of these days, somebody's going to make a really stupid mistake and come through that wall. It's going to be the last mistake they ever make." And anyway, she went back, finally went back to sleep. I stayed there for another half hour. No other event happened after that. But the point is that they are detectable. Abductees, sometimes you can be trained to do this, by the way. Other ways you can detect the alien is through equipment. And I always go to conferences and everybody always says, "Well, Derrel, all that stuff you talk about, that's pretty big stuff, but I can sense there's aliens in the audience." I said, "Really? Well, why can't I?" "Well, I'm more sensitive than you." I said, "Okay, that's fine." And I pull out my FLIR and go through the audience, and I said, "Well, that's strange. I don't see any of them out there." "What do you mean?" I said, "There is a specific heat signature that they have, and everybody out there is about the same temperature, except for you. Your head's just a little hot for making stuff up, and I don't like you doing that."
Well, okay, so I got to ask you a question about the 3 thing. What you said, the 3rd month, the 3rd week, 3 o'clock in the morning,
That's right.
and 3 times in a row after that.
That's it.
When do they start counting the months?
This is different with everybody. Everybody's
Okay.
events are different. If you 3 o'clock in the morning is almost like ringing the dinner bell for most events. Most people will say it was around 3 o'clock in the morning, but if we have some of our abductees who have a clock next to them and they can at least move their neck enough they can roll over and look at the clock, and almost every time it'll be 1:11, 2:11, 3:11, 4:11, 5:55. It's all multiples of 5 or additions of 11s almost every time.
Yeah.
And in several people's books, investigators have noted it. They noted the times, but they didn't notice the correlation of they're all multiples of 11. So I could tell you about several books, but it's not important. But another thing important about abductees is the first question I ask them, and I got 2 of them this week with implant cases that were remarkable. And first question I asked them after we got our preliminaries all taken care of, I said, "What's your number?" "What do you mean?" I said, "I'm not mean at all. I'm just asking you. There's a specific number that you are focused upon. You don't know why, but it's just there and it's yours. What is it?" And one guy said, "Well, it's really weird." He said, "But about 3:11 in the mornings when I get picked up." And I said, "Oh, okay. I said, "But what is your number?" He said, "It's weird." He said, It's sevens." And I said, "Okay." And another guy at a conference, this was in a library in Montgomery, Texas, where I was doing a presentation for the library, and asked the guy when his was, and he said, "Well," he said, I don't want to sit here and tell you." He said, "I could be making it up." I said, "You could." He showed me a photograph that he took. I have it, that I can show it to anybody, and it says 13 in cloud, 2 big clouds up there. the number 13, just as clear as a bell. I like to fell over. He said, that's my number. And he said, now I'm a contactee. He said, I think they're here to, help us and do all kinds. I said, I won't argue with you. I'm not here to hurt your feelings or do anything. I'm not here to make anybody believe anything I want to tell them. That's it. And he said, my number's 13. And he said, and when I asked him, this is what showed up in the sky. I said, okay, it's good. That's good to know. So I keep it for reference. But everybody's got a number. And my wife looked at me one day, we're driving down the road, and she said, wait a minute, what's your number? I said, sweetie, you got that the day we got married. She said, the other number. And I said, oh, okay, that one. I said, okay. I said, 11. 11 is my number. And a movie producer from Hollywood, Jerry Bruckheimer's partner, called me one time, and he said, big question, 333. It's a multiple. I'm telling you, I know. It's people think you make this up. You don't have to, because I often tell people this stuff before they ever tell me. But anyway, this TV guy says, I said, why in the world do you want to waste money and time on somebody like me on a movie? He said, because you've got a story that's incredible. That's what it said. He said, a man who hunts the alien and he's going after him over his son. He said, that's an incredible story. And he said, it's provable. And you've got so much evidence on it. I said, I do for a fact. And he said, and he started asking questions. I said, you want to qualify your client, right? And he said, yeah, I do. He said, we're not going to spend millions of dollars on you and find out you're not the guy. And I said, fire away. He said, are there certain numbers that have importance to you? I said, yeah, 11's actually. And he said, is 11 important to you? And I said, yeah. I said, I was born at night at 7:30 at night in Texas, and he says, well, why is 11 important to you? I said, well, 11s show up in lots of UFO stuff. It's prominent in a lot of things, or multiples of it, or additions of it. 333 is a good example. It's just everywhere. And he said, well, is that number really important to you? I said, yeah, I was born on 111. I said, I don't know if it has anything to do with anything. I don't know. I don't care. I said, I'm just saying that in our statistics, when you fill out our forms, the statistics ask everyone, all kinds of people write me, and that one lady wrote this last week, and she said, I swear you're reading my mail. That's why is that? And she said, because every question you're asking me, it's the same thing I'm thinking about. I said, you're just one of us, sweetie. It's okay. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with you. I've been through this longer than you've been alive, and I've interviewed tens of thousands of people all over the world, and I'm telling you, it's great stuff. And I said, these are just statistics. I said 55% of people taken are Native American, Indian, Irish, Celtic, guaranteed. And in fact, one conference at Roswell, I told everybody, I said, let me go a little further. It goes in further into, and I mentioned the Basque of northern Spain. And they said, 2 people stood up in the middle of the conference, said, we're Basque, both of us, in northern Spain. I said, may I ask you if you guys had UFO contact? He said, absolutely. And I said, may I ask you, this is a personal question. If you don't want to answer, don't answer. I said, don't feel offended. I won't be. He said, what's that? I said, you guys are a little rowdy, aren't you? He said, yeah. He said, the Basque have got a terrible reputation for war and fighting. You don't tell them anything. I mean, I said, I've known that, but I'd never talked to a Basque and asked them the question. That's good to get it verified by you. But numbers are huge. Statistics are huge. The statistics, I tell people our statistics are correct. They're right on target. And they're like, a guy wrote today, he filled out his forms and he said, when are you going to write me back? And I said, hey, give me a break. I've got a suicide and 2 people with implants this week. One of them's got an implant that's doing, if it is an implant, it's nearly gone through his entire skull. you mind if you give me a couple of days here to think about this? I said, I've got things to do here. That there are, believe it or not, you're not the most important case in the whole world. You're not. You think you are. We all think that, but that's not the case. But anyway, I looked on his forum and spent just enough time to open it and look at it. And I looked at, what it goes through your genetic history, and it says Cherokee Indian. Now, why did I know that? 55% of the people taken are Native American Indians, and the majority of those are Cherokee Irish. It's the statistics are impossible for that to be true. For one group of people, like abductees as an example, or contactees, to be that. It's I can show you the stats on it. I mean, it's just too complicated to go into here. But the point is that the statistics are correct, and we've been following this stuff for a long, long time. In fact, since the 80s, and a lot of people started reading our stuff, and then they started copying and putting it on the internet, and then putting their own name on it as if they had invented it. So I could care less. But the point is that there are a lot of things about abductions that people can know and can be trained to do. You can be trained to, like a little girl at Roswell. I have a notebook that's laying open, and I used to be a cop. And one of the things we do is when somebody gets assaulted or raped or whatever, we have this, we either bring an analyst in, or somebody not handwriting, but an artist to draw as best they can who you're describing. You correct them and so on. But for the alien, I already have the pictures. So I have them look at them. It's a flip chart. You flip and make your own alien. And of course, there's about 100 ways you can make aliens there. People always say, but Derrel, don't you know that that's just a big bunch of bunk? Because you know what they're going to say. I said, I was born at night, and it was last night, and I was born in Texas. Do you think I didn't know that people are going to fake stuff like that? I said, I already know what the alien looks like. I do. I don't have to guess. I have to wonder. And I said, I've got hundreds of drawings on top of all. I said, my point is, my notebook, you flip through it, and everybody giggles when they look there. And then there was this little girl flipping through, giggling and everything. Her parents standing next to her, and then she starts screaming when she flips to the one page. Her daddy looks at me and says, what does that mean? I said, I don't know. What does it mean? I looked at her and said, sweetie, you recognize somebody? She said. And he says, well, I have a bigger question for you. What can we do about it? I said, well, not only is the alien detectable a lot of times, but there are things you can do to help yourself as well. And I said, your daughter's what, about 6 now? And he said, yeah. And I said, I'll show you. I said, write me personally at home, and I will send you personal directions of what to do with your daughter. And I said, you may be very surprised that there are a lot of wonderful things you can do. And he just, well, this is amazing. I said, well, it is for you because it's new to you. I said, it isn't to me. I've already been there. I know what your kid's going to go through.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, what is the 85% mark where we interview people and we ask them about when they had their encounter or their abduction? What month do they usually say?
Usually March.
The 3rd month of the year?
No.
And that was when ours was, and ours was during the 3rd week of March, almost at 3:00 in the morning.
And what's your number?
Mine is 3:33.
I got it. What were the 3 things you just told me? See what I'm saying? 333. So the anomaly of that, it doesn't mean that everybody's got their numbers 25 or whatever it is. It does mean there's going to be 25 different things happen. The fact is that the alien, for purposes known to themselves, love to, they have a need to substantiate a number system with you. Sometimes it has very collative information, like your case is a good example, perhaps in my case. But other people, they get abducted. I get people write me all the time saying, we visited our best top psychic, and they say, alien abductions is over. They've been commanded by the Grand Council not to do anymore. I said, that's weird. I said, we're still having all kinds of abductions. That's funny. They didn't bother to tell our guys any of that. I said, I'm just not real confident in your sources.
Yeah.
This business as usual where I'm at.
Well, I have to ask you this next question, or I'm going to get screamed at by our good friend Benny Foggin. He's told me to ask you about a time or a time you had a rib broken or an injured rib, because he told us he was abducted and they had cut him from through his sternum all the way down and then did something to soften his ribs so that they would peel open and they could get to his insides. One of his ribs was damaged, and he said to ask you about your rib.
Mine was a different situation, but Benny did tell me that story, and again, whenever we go into a case, if you got to understand, that's a TV program investigating the case. They want TV stuff. Me, when I heard Benny's story, the two things I want to do immediately, I want to get a cardiovascular surgeon to look him over, and I want to get MRI, and I want to, and with one of his relatives, I did get a DNA sample, and they said, "Why do you want that?" I said, "You've got to be kidding." I said, you people are so far. You're good people, but you're so far behind the power curve of what's going on. That's one of the reasons I don't do much TV, and I rarely do radio programs. I don't mean to be ugly at all, but I said I just can't believe that something like that happens in an apparent abduction experience. Agreed, it's only a story at that point, but the reason you do the medical and all the other stuff, the 7 hats that I use to investigate a case, is because these hats are going to be very explicit. They're going to be very clear. And of course, the TV show doesn't have the time to do all that, and they're not going to spend thousands of dollars in MRIs and testing and everything else, which I wish they would have, because Benny's got a great case, and I'd just love to see it carried out further. I really would have. And in my case, as an example, I got an implant at age 12, and I was wide awake when it happened, and I heard every word they said to each other and what they told me separately, which is radically different. And my point is that that's how I learned about alien implants. So I went to it later, several years ago, went to an ENT at the VA hospital, and he looked at me, looked at my nasal passage, and said, when did you get surgery in your nose? Well, I've never had a surgery, but I have had a procedure by the alien at age 12. Now, I didn't want to tell him that for obvious reasons, but I later was confronted by my general practitioner at the VA. She said, apparently you and the ENT got into it. And I said, we did. And she says, well, what happened in your nasal passage? I said, just because I want it on the record, I'm just going to go ahead and tell you anyway. She said, oh, okay. She's a straight-laced doctor you'll ever want to meet. She did not like what she was hearing. That's when I was 12 years old. I got abducted by an alien presence and was taken on board a craft. And they did certain procedure in my nostril. And that's exactly where the surgical stuff came from. There is no medical history in my record anywhere of that ever occurring. So who did it? I guarantee you I didn't do it. So the second thing was I went to another, when I had another GP at another VA hospital, the major one in Houston. I came in and he said, "Well, how do you feel, Derrel?" And I said, "Well, okay, doc." And he said, "Well, your right side should be hurting you." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Well, because you're broken ribs." That's what broken ribs are those. Of course, I knew what it was. And he called the radiologist, and they got into a screaming argument. That radiologist screamed at him and said, I don't make $250,000 a year doing not reading." He said, "I know exactly what happened." He said, "He's got broken ribs. I'm telling you, I can look at around the radiologist." And he hung the phone up and smiled and said, "I guess you got broken ribs." That's what
Wow.
the question is. The question is, doc, how do you have broken ribs and not know it? That's my wife got a cracked rib in martial arts, and she could barely breathe walking. Broken ribs, you don't move at all. I mean, it just, anyway. That happened when I was 17, and those particular beings that I told you about that came in, they were not friendly. That's how I got the broken ribs.
Hmm. Well, since you brought this up, I might know the answer to this question already, but I just want to throw it out there. Looking at your military and intelligence background, when you were serving as an MP or as a police officer, civilian or otherwise, did you have any experiences with the phenomenon while you were on the job that kind of took you back, that maybe they were interfering at some point with your job, or trying to
Well,
let you know they were still there?
no. When I was in the CIA, I was I was investigating cases when I was 16 and older, and I studied scientific anomalies back then. I couldn't understand why scientists looked at evidence like that and they just ignored it. How UFOs included. How can you? But I've seen them out there in New Mexico, White Sands proving grounds, and so on. And anyway, the point is that while in the military, I was still investigating UFO cases, which are pretty rare because you don't go around telling everybody, tell me about your UFO experience in the Army. They don't like to do that, and it gets you reported. And in the CIA, while I was in there, I was teaching. I was a martial arts instructor for the Central Intelligence Agency as well, and one of my three of the particular students I had there were from the College of William and Mary. One of them was the director of admissions at William and Mary, and his two daughters. One of his daughters was having a UFO experience during the time while I was in the CIA. Now, I investigated that while I was in the CIA, but I never did tell the company about any of that for personal reasons. I just didn't want to do that. But I never had any interference as a police officer. When I got out of the service, I became a private investigator. Been one for over 40 years, and I've obviously seen UFOs since then, and investigated cases literally all over the world, from Japan to one of our surgeries on implants was in India and Turkey. I ran several different conferences and tours, and go back to Tepe, Karan Tepe, and so on. The point is that I meet people of every stripe and color you can imagine all over the world, and they all tell me this. This is, your audience needs to hear this. This is fun to kind of make a little bit of lightness here on a difficult subject. I said, I want to give you a metaphor, and then and to show you how practical this is as a cop metaphor. If I walk upon a scene as a cop and find a person laying on the ground dead with a knife stuck in his back, and there are 8 witnesses standing there looking at the dead body, my first question is, what happened? And if I get 8 different answers, guess how many people are going downtown?
8.
All 8 of them. Because I guarantee you that guy did not die 8 different ways. He didn't do it. So that's the metaphor. So how does that have any reference to the UFO phenomena? It has reference this way. When I go to Ireland, they say, you got to watch out for the wee folk, or they'll come in the night and get you. They may not bring you back. And that's interesting. That's when I talk to different Native Americans, they say, you got to watch out for the star people. They may not bring you back. And I go over here to the people in Turkey. They say, you got to watch out for the jinn because they live in these. They may not bring you back. I said, it's all the same story. I said, you all have 8 different stories, but it is the same story. You just don't recognize it because of your culture. And it's the same knife sticking out of the guy's back, but you all describe differently. But I know the difference, and that's okay. But it's funny to listen to everybody tell their own viewpoint, and it sounds like they got 8 different kinds of aliens and 8 different countries doing 8 different things. No, they don't. They got the same bunch of clowns doing whatever they do. They got MIBs. They got MIBs in Slovakia that look exactly like our 1952 to 1960s MIBs. They describe them exactly. Ask me how I know that. I've been there 3 times.
Yeah. Well, we're getting questions in chat, and some of them are matching up with some of the questions I have for you as well. So I kind of want to bounce around a little bit on this topic. But I do want to get to physical evidence and implants. But this person asks here, this is Terrence Wills from, I think he said he's from Australia. Possibly?
No, Terrence is from New York.
Oh, New York. Okay. Says question for Mr. Sims. Do you think the government is fully aware of this abductions not friendly, and that's why they don't disclose? Also, what's your best guess of the why? And I had a similar question, so I'm going to blend it in here, where the question I had was that some people believe that much of this phenomenon could be part of some kind of a deep state or a new world order psyop designed to manipulate the public or the Congress, hide advanced technology or cover up black programs, special access programs and all that. What are your thoughts on that theory? So kind of blend those all together. They're kind of the same ilk. What's your thoughts?
Well, let's deal with the first one first. What was the first one? The other one's going to be longer.
The first one was the government is not readily going to disclose anything because they understand about the abductions and they're not friendly.
It's important for people to understand this. This is I don't know all the answers. I wished I did. And if I did, I'd tell everybody the answers because I think everybody deserves to know. This is a world phenomena. It deals with all of us. It doesn't deal with part of us. And the intelligence community doesn't agree with that at all. And they don't think you need to know anything. It's none of your business. Well, I think you do because, first of all, you pay their salary and you pay their black budgets that sponsor this sort of thing. So I disagree with that. It's one of the reasons I quit the company when I did. It's just stuff like that. So, number one, the statement, and I need to make this clear. The government doesn't know anything. The government doesn't have a clue. You have to understand what the government. If you mean the government does like the Congress and all that. They don't know anything. That's why they hear these whistleblowers and they're sitting there with scratching their heads like, really? They don't have a clue. They really don't. And the ones that think they have a clue or want to do something like it, like Representative Luna and some of these other people that want to do the right thing. Let me back up a little bit. I was on a cruise here a while back, and they had me on a panel with 2 attorneys and 2 of the big shots in the UFO community, in the legal end of it and in the so-called disclosure project.
Was
And I
that
told
Danny Sheehan?
yes. And I
Mhm.
said, you know, I have a great deal of respect for both of you guys. I really do. I said, but I've been in the intelligence business, and you guys are very smart. You're very well learned. You're well educated. You've been through a lot. I said, but you're going to force the government to go to disclosure. I said, really? Oh, you got them shaking in their boots. After they waited for you for over 50 years to show up, and you haven't done anything yet. And I said, you know how effective the Roswell Whopper was? They told everybody it was a balloon. You know how effective that was? They got a dozen more for you just like it that are better. And they're so good, you're probably going to buy into them. None of them are true. Doesn't matter. That's the answer you're going to get. What are you going to do? File a lawsuit? Is that what you're going to do to the intelligence community? I said, there probably are not over 100 people, over 100 people at most, that know most of what's going on. And forget the word government, because the government to these type people doesn't mean the same thing. Your elected officials are going to be there for 4, 8, or whatever few years. That's all. Your job is to get elected and keep living in that $12, $15 mansion that you live in on $100,000 salary. How does that happen? That's another question. But anyway, the point is that so the government doesn't know, and everybody wants to know and think they will. I told these two really good people. I said, I'm going to give you a hint. I said, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the intelligence community that you might think, but I'm going to tell you from experience. You're not going to get anything. And what you get, I guarantee you, is not going to be nothing like what is really there. And third of all, and I said, I mean this with great respect, and I'm saying it for your benefit. If you rattle the wrong cages, you beat on the wrong doors. They're real special programs for people like you. I said, there's one of them. I said, and I know personally about it. It's called, they made a movie about it, actually. Uh, it's about imprisonment, uh, and they won't have a trial. You'll just disappear. And 40 years later, you can show up, but you're going to have a lot different attitude when you get here, if you get back. I said, you don't know anything about that because you haven't created a problem yet. You think you have. Oh, we've got the government on the run. They're doing this, they're doing that. No, they're not. I said, these top corporations, I said, that are involved in just making some of the materials. I said, one of them told I think it was two-star admiral. He said, I demand to know, and he was like a second in charge of DNI. And they told him, you need to tone it down, buddy. Did you
That was
understand? You know
Admiral.
who I am? Yeah.
Was that Admiral Willis
Yeah. He said,
or
well,
Wilson?
do you know who I am? And he said, do you want to lose one of your stars? Is that how you want to retire? And these are corporate people talking. He said, I am, do you know who he went back to his boss and told his boss, the one that I think Tulsi Gabbard is now in charge of it, but his boss was a man at the time, and he said, I've studied this UFO phenomenon, but I didn't believe any of it. And he said, I found that they've actually got parts, pieces, and things, and they're back engineering. They're doing all kinds of stuff we don't know about. His boss looked at him and said, don't ever bring that subject up to me again. Ever. Don't do it. He said, I don't even get to discuss it with anybody. So, like I said, the government don't know nothing. And the people who do know, you're not going to get any information from them. You can just forget that. We'll just take them to court. Well, you just take them to court anytime you think you're ready, because about half the people in the court are on their payroll.
Yeah.
You're not going to
Well,
do anything.
Is this kind of what was happening with Lou Elizondo? I don't know if you're familiar. I mean, I'm sure you're
I know
familiar with
Lou. I
him.
knew him.
But
I know him.
yeah.
I know Lou. I was at his last presentation up in Dallas, and we're in the green room with him talking and going on, and all kinds of pictures and fun. Lou's a good egg, and he pretty much echoes what I'm telling you. It's he can't tell you, and if he could, he would, but he doesn't want to go to prison. And I'm telling
Yeah.
you, what he's telling you is true. Well, he printed a book. That book was totally approved. He can tell you anything you want to know about that book in the book, but he will not go beyond the book. Why? Because he's not approved. He's not. Look, I got a top secret clearance, and if I breach that clearance information without having it cleared, I can go to prison slick as a button.
Yeah.
They can activate that in a minute.
Well, let's see. Question for you from Dorothy here. She says, if you know it, what percentage of the population overall from 47 to present have had implants put in them?
Great question. I love the questions from your people there. We don't know the answer to that. I can tell you right now that to put everything in perspective, because I do not like conspiracy stuff. I like stuff that's real, that I can deal with, that I can point to and say yes or whatever because of my own experience. Almost every person I meet that's had an abduction experience, almost every one of them say, I've got an implant. I know I do. You need to find it. I'm sure it's in there. And I may have 5 or 10 of them. Some people tell me I got over 100 of them. I said, really? I said, well, you're really unique. The fact is that I look at hundreds of x-rays every year, and I find almost none. The implants that we do find are quite rare. I have 100 cases currently right now that I'm working on. I could take 10 of them to surgery in a week if I had the money. 10 a week, every week. I got 2 cases right now that I'm working on. They're so they outshine anything, including my own experience. Really amazing stuff. But implants are the problem with implants. Everybody thinks, well, implant. They always use the word, I got chipped. No, you didn't. Yeah, I got chipped by the government. No, well, if you did, it's provable. Where's your X-ray? Well, I don't have one. Go get one. I don't. Where do I look? Where do you think you were chipped? Well, I think it was in my head. Well, get an X-ray of your head. You know, I want you to prove to me what you got. You know, if you got it. And a lot of people, the little some things that they show, it's clear it's not an implant. But the implants that are real, I assure you, they're quite real. They're amazing, to say the very least. But I did the first presentation in 1992 at John Muir Medical Hospital for 250 surgeons and doctors in a continuing education program. That's a paid program where I'm to lecture for them on medical complications of alleged human alien contact implants. And they sat there with their mouth open like, now, most of them didn't believe a word of that. That's okay. I didn't go there for that purpose. I said, I'm here to give you 5 things that we're going to find if these alien implants are real in the surgeries. I'm telling you this in advance so that when we do a surgery, you can use it and say, see there, he lied about everything. He was wrong. Well, the only problem is the first 2 surgeries we had in 1995 proved 100% correct. In fact, the 2 doctors looked at me and said, how in God's name could you possibly know there was an inflammatory process, non-inflammatory cells surrounding those implants? You can't know that. In fact, the pathologist said, that's impossible. You didn't find inflammatory cells inside the body. They don't grow inside a body. That's impossible. He was screaming. Of course, that's what I wanted to hear. Impossible, can't be, and all that, because you're just making my case for me.
Yeah,
So
you just
wonderful.
proved it.
I love it. You know, but point is that those things showed up to be true in the first 2 surgeries. So, I mean, within days, I got a phone call from the National Institute of Discovery Science. That's Bob Bigelow's outfit. He said, I've got, I think 3 or 4 doctors with me. They're PhDs, and one guy's got 2 PhDs and a doctorate, and it's MD. And I said, okay, what I owe the honor of the call. He said, well, you seem to find evidence we didn't even know existed. We had 18 top scientists on our board. That's when they were back doing the Skinwalker Ranch and all that. He said, we had no idea. And I said, well, most people don't. Well, he said, how did you find all this stuff? And of course, that's a trap question.
Yes, it is.
They're just trying to get you. And I said, well, it had nothing to do with high intelligence. We know that for sure. I said, but the fact is, if you want to find a donut, go find a cop. They didn't think that was funny. It wasn't. I didn't tell it as a joke. I meant it to be a truth.
Right.
And later got bared out to be a truth in their experience. So I said, if you want to find good alien evidence, go find a Native American tracker that's an abductee that understands the alien, and you'll find all the evidence you want. And anyway, they finally brought me up to Las Vegas, the NIDS, to see the 18 scientists there and do a presentation with one of my doctors. And they kicked out, there were 3 people, Mupon and another psychologist and me, that were doing a presentation, and they wouldn't fund the other 2. And they said, Bob Bigelow came downstairs and said, you're not going to believe this. He said, you're voted 100% by every one of the scientists. That's Ballet, all of them. Said, wow, we got to do this. We got to see if he'll let us do a scientific study on it. I said, I'll let you do the study if you do a blinded study. I don't want anyone knowing anything about where they came from, what they are. I want it as scientific as we can get it. Deal. And he says, he said, well, you don't seem to be that excited about all this. We're paying thousands of dollars to get this done. What's the problem? That's because you guys are so far behind the power curve. That's all you want to know. Are the objects extraterrestrial? I'll give you a hint. They already are. But you go ahead and do your testing. He said, well, what do you want us to do? And I said, Bob, I want to do isotopic ratios tests on the elements that we're going to find there. We found 11 different elements on these objects they shouldn't have been there. I said, these turned out to be rare meteorites, needle-like laminations, just quarter-inch long needle-like projections of a rare meteorite from outer space. How extraterrestrial do you want to get? How'd they get inside a human body without anybody knowing it? Then how'd you wrap it in their own skin and a biological non-inflammatory system so the body would not ever recognize it and nobody would ever find it? And the abductees in most cases don't even know they have it. So he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want you to do isotopic ratio studies on each of the elements. He said, why would we do that? And I said, as unpleasant as this may sound to you, Bob, I'm an alien hunter. I hunt them that hunted me and hunted my son. And I want to know where they're mining and where they're at. You want a good clue? Do isotopic ratios on those elements, and they'll tell you where they're mining. And he got real quiet. They never did do the isotopic ratio test, so I'm having to do it out of pocket. But anyway, the further answer to the lady's question, we don't. We do. I did have implant cases years before. In my opinion, before 1947, we don't know how long the aliens have been doing this. We have no idea. Some people say, well, it's the government doing all this. No, it's not.
No, it goes back into antiquity. I mean,
this stuff is it's old. Whatever it is, I said, but I have to deal with the stuff I can prove, not the stuff I think or is a story. It's anecdotal. In other words, I have to deal with stuff that I have evidence of, that I can back up with MRIs, CAT scans, and surgical operations, et cetera, et cetera. And then the science, of course. So the implants have been around for a while, but the impressive point, and the point that should really interest everybody, in my opinion, is not how many millions of people were implanted, because there probably weren't, but how many people weren't implanted, and specifically the ones that were, what were they? And you should be asking questions like, where was the implant located? Was it metallic? Was it biologic? Was it some other substance? Where in the body? How did it get there? How was it actually installed? These are really important questions. Almost nobody asks these questions. Well, I have an implant wherever, and one guy claimed, he said, I have an implant just like you did, and nasal patch, the exact same place in 1960, just like you did. And I said, I beg, I don't want to be ugly here. I said, it sounds like you heard one of my question and answer times. You just copied the information. He sent me his x-rays. The implant is still behind his eye, up through his nasal passage, behind his eye, exactly in the same place mine was. He's still got it in there. Exactly. So I have a great deal more credibility to the provenance of his case. And he gave me permission to use the x-ray, in which I do in my presentations. But I'm amazed at how few people have implants. Absolutely amazed. Everybody swears they got one. Everybody. But when you examine them, you waste a lot of money and time, because in most cases they do not. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean you hadn't been tampered with. It doesn't mean you didn't have all these other problems. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that just because they did an exam or something on you doesn't mean you haven't.
Yeah, I think our first case that we talked to anyone with an implant was Terry Lovelace.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know Terry. I broke his case back in 2016.
Yeah. Encounter at Devil's Den.
Yep.
Yeah, he's got a good story, and he's got a good abduction story case, and that's pretty cool. But I in my box, I've got a box I carry around with me, especially at conferences, and in it, it's got all kinds of implants in it, and all kinds of people come up and challenge me, scientists and everybody. But the big people that come to challenge me are the psychics. They want to, may I come in and, just, use my skills. I said, I don't care if you do, but why? Because I want to test my powers, skills. And in fact, one of the last people to do that was a dear friend of mine, believe it or not. A really nice lady, been friends for 20 years. And she did her psychic, whatever it was, on the implants. And she said, did I get it right? And I said, I never tell anybody that information. I said, it's important for me to know. It's not important for you to know. But Derrel, we're friends, and I want you to tell me. I said, don't put that on me. Please, please, please. And so I did. I said, you got them all wrong. All of them. What does that mean? I said, I don't know, go back to school or something. I don't know what it means. I don't know what to tell you. I said, I know exactly which ones are real and which ones are not. I know. I said, I've done 27 surgical removals from India to the United States. And I discovered this stuff in 1960 in my own case. You think I wouldn't actually know what I was looking for? I said, I've got cardiovascular surgeons, brain surgeons, and they, the big question they ask me when we get ready to do a surgery, what do you want to do? Because they don't know what to do. They know how to cut and remove something, but they don't know how and what we actually need for evidence. They have no idea. So we have to instruct them on exactly, and it depends on the implant, depends where it depends on a lot of things. So it's much more involved than just I've been chipped. So take that little chip out of me and tell, it's probably a RFID chip. You mean? RFID chip is one of the simpler. We put those things in dogs and horses.
Right.
They have a range of about 5 feet. Who do you think really wants to chip you with a RFID chip and check you at 5 feet away? Not likely.
Right.
Not likely.
Question for you, Derrel, because this came up earlier in chat. We didn't start, but this is also something that I'm always intrigued by. In all of the cases that you have been looking into over the years, have you ever looked at a connection of like a connection of blood types, or whether there's the Rh negative factor in play? Gotta ask.
Yeah, I got a funny story to tell you on this one. Yeah, the answer is yes. And I invited one of my abductees who's a stem cell specialist. And I said, I want you to do a presentation for me on blood types and whatever, answer all these UFO questions. She said, okay. And I said, when you get there, I said, we've got a guy that shows up every meeting. And he does everything he can to bone up on the subject. And he's going to prove to you that he knows 10 times more than you do. And you're basically an idiot compared to him. I said, when he gets out of line, just tear him a new one. And she said, you don't mind? I said, not at all. He deserves every bit of it. You'll see what I mean. And sure enough, she's doing this beautiful medical presentation. And he butts in and says, well, I noticed that you didn't get into much of the RH negative and RH positive. You didn't do anything there, did you? I wonder why. And she looks over at him and says, whenever we have a question about blood or about that subject, she says, I call Mr. Sims and ask him what the latest research is on it from the abduction point of view. Because you obviously don't have a clue about anything. Well, I know this. And he starts quoting all this stuff he read on the internet. She said, you're dumber than a bag of hammers. and then she did exactly what I was hoping she'd do. Then she proved it medically. She said, do you have any medical training whatsoever? No. Do you have this? Do you have any special degrees? No. She said, well, I do. I'm a stem cell specialist. I said, you see that thing up there that said on the RH factor? She says, yeah. And it has like 214 up there, little tiny number. She said, let me tell you how stupid you really are. You're ignorant and you're stupid, both. You're ignorant because you don't know, and you're stupid because you think you know. She said, she mentioned, I forget how many it was up in the hundreds, I think it was. She said there were like, whatever that number was up in the corner, said there are 214 kinds that we know about. Which one are you? Well, he just got quiet. She said, that's number one. Number two is there's a ... and a 00 whatever. She said, do you know what that means? That means we don't know where the rest of them are, but there's a bunch more probably. So how is it you read on the internet and you know everything, and we're still studying it, and I'm a stem cell specialist, and you don't have a clue? And you don't even know which one you are anyway. And anyway, he never came back. After that meeting, she really ripped him pretty hard. What I will do, if your listener wants to email me, welcome to go to our website, and it's Derrel W. Sims at alienhunter.com or mac.com, which is fine. And if you want to write me, I'll send you a detailed outline, but it's going to surprise you. And it's all medical. These are all doctors. See, the people that work for me, they're all medical doctors. We have a cardiovascular anesthesiologists, ENTs, cardiovascular surgeons. These are not idiots. These are not your local doctor who thinks, well, the pH, the RH negative is this and it's that and whatever. Now, these people are specialists in their field. They kind of know a little more than they know more than I do for sure. But when we find something really unusual about the blood, and I think there is something unusual about the blood. The RH factor isn't it. I'll give you a hint. That isn't it. It is to the people in the UFO community because that's the only thing they know about. Well, my blood factor is different. The majority of the people who are abductees have O negative blood, like me. So what? The issue is there's something about the blood and it's in the blood, but we don't know what it is yet. We're sure of that, but I don't know what it is. And until I do, I'm not going to go around telling people, you have RH negative, you have monkey blood. Where in the world did monkey blood show up in human? You know that monkeys don't have the other RH? None of them. They have one, but not the other. Now, why is that? If this monkey blood came and got into the human genome, why didn't the other happen to the monkeys? And anyway, just if anybody's interested, I'll be glad to send them a write up on it from one of our doctors. And it's a lot of fun, but it's not the stuff you're going to get on the internet that's going to tickle your innards. It's actually medical information, and it's real blunt. And I like that because I like clear cut answers. I don't like hype. I don't like, well, I believe. What I believe doesn't mean anything. That's just a belief. That doesn't mean anything. It's a story at best in my head. And what I like to deal with is facts and things that I can bring to the table and make clear for people. I want people to be as clear as possible and to know as much as possible about whatever it is, about implants, about blood, about anything. And if we know about it, and I'll give you an example. When I was writing a book on implants, my assistant, she was a surgical nurse, known her for many years, and she said, well, we need something for this chapter, a real zinger for this chapter. I said, okay. She said, well, what would it be? And I said, well, I don't know. Do aliens have implants? And she laughed and laughed and said, do they? I said, sweetie, they are implants. People don't know. They don't have a clue. They think they're beings from Zeta Reticuli. I'm sure of it. And we know all of this. We know that. I said, if you just look at the alien carefully, I have a picture I call I'm ex-cop, so it's called The Usual Suspects. It's a lineup of the aliens. And in that drawing, it's got the mantis, it's got the gray, the short gray, the taller gray, and all these different entities. And somebody challenged me at a conference and said, well, that's just not true. And I said, okay. I said, take me to task. They said, well, they're from this planet. And I said, where did you get that information? Well, this lady channels. And I said, really? Your best information, a lady channeled an alien. And he said she was from wherever. I said, even if you believed every word she said, and even if what she said was true, what makes you think the alien knows the truth? He doesn't even know where he's from. He's made, hatched, cloned, or manufactured. I remember when I told you he didn't have any belly button or TT? After I got a little older, I got thinking about that and realized if you don't have a TT, you don't procreate. If you don't have a belly button, you weren't born. You don't have to be a doctor or a scientist to figure that out. It's kind of obvious. I've got some pictures of hybrid alien beings. They don't have a genitalia, and they don't have a belly button either. And it's not on the internet. You're not going to find it out there. It ain't there. Most of the evidence I have, don't share and don't care to share because I'm not out there to try to prove a bunch of stuff to people and get a following. I don't care. I've had my own agenda, and it's about doing something with the good evidence that we have. And arguing with people, it doesn't mean anything to me. One lady argued with me, and gosh, that was in England last year, and she said, "The rainbow children are specially chosen and they're being trained physics by the alien, and you should pay attention to that. And I said, sweetie, I'm not here to attack you or your beliefs or your rainbow children or anything. I don't do that. I just think it's important that you understand that they're teaching you our physics. They're not teaching you theirs.
Mm-hmm.
No kid's going to show up how to build a UFO. It's not going to happen. I said, you're missing the boat by 15 yards. You're more impressed with the results of what you're seeing and not what the alien's actually up to. I said, I used to be in the intelligence business. I used 7 different hats to investigate cases. Medical hat. Now, everybody's got a UFO hat. So do I. It's been fooled before. Remember when George Adamski came along back in the 50s and 60s? He fooled everybody. He wrote his book, the first book. He wrote it as a science fiction because it was, and it didn't sell. He later republished it as the truth, and everybody in the world bought it. He became a celebrity and a star overnight. I met his top guy, George Adamski's top man. And he asked me one time at a conference, he said, what do you think of that guy? And I said, well, I don't like commenting about other people. It's none of my business. And he said, I want to know what you think. And I said, it's just a personal thought. I said, I don't go around telling stuff like that. I'm not here to attack people. He said, tell me what you think. And I said, I think George had some experiences, and I also think he made a lot of stuff up. But there are people that do that in the UFO community. I could point them out right now. And he laughed and he said, I'm his right-hand man and have been forever. I said, okay, talk to me. He said, I followed him before he passed away on a train. He said, I had to know myself. And I said, okay, nothing wrong with that. He said, I stayed on the train in the other car without him seeing me. And he said, we finally got to the destination. He got off, got to the conference and told everybody how he'd got there. The UFO had dropped him off. He said, it broke my heart. He said, I trusted that man with everything I knew, money and everything. It broke my heart. I said, sir, I said, any story you make up, you could be a star overnight in the UFO community. That's people like me can barely get enough money to do surgeries on people and get them help. And here I'm, more evidence people shake a stick at. I said, it's heartbreaking, really. And I said, I'm sorry.
It gets overshadowed by the people that want to make up the sensational stories. And it's really disappointing, because one of the reasons why Michelle and I started this whole thing was because we had nobody to turn to when we had our experience. And
Yes.
so we just started asking people on Facebook, started a Facebook group, and we're like, hey, anybody see anything on March 18th, 2018 at 2:30 a.m. in this area? Because we drove under a huge black triangle. Anybody else see it? Within a few months, it was 3,000 people had signed in,
Yeah.
and were telling us all kinds of things. It wasn't just that.
Sure.
It was over at Fermi 2 nuclear plant. People are seeing things zipping around there, going around and disappearing. The 1994 UFO flap in Michigan here that was covered on Sightings, and we had the radar operator from Muskegon here talking about how he tracked these things for the sheriff's department, and they were following them along the coast of Michigan. The 1966, Hynek debacle. But we have the guy who wrote the book about the fighter pilots who tracked the UFOs over Ann Arbor and Dexter, and it made them look like idiots.
Yep.
Just could do right-hand turns, and they were like, we couldn't lock it on the infrared radar. We couldn't, and and by the way, that's Ray Szymanski in the Swamp Gas My Ass book that he did, plus other things like Victoria's Secret and all of these books that he wrote about families being visited and taken. It's just, there's so much of that. And then we got to have the people that want to make things up. And it's kind of disappointing because as a scientist myself, as an Earth and space scientist who did not believe any of this stuff before 2018, and then we had our experience, and I hear in my head, "You don't belong here. Get away. You don't belong." And then a few months later, my thyroid is turned into is spazzing out. My hair falls out. I lose like 20 pounds in like 10 days, 25 pounds in 10 days. And then they tell me I have a very rare condition of Graves' disease. It's hyperthyroidism. I'm like,
Yeah.
what? What?
How does that happen?
And so, yeah, really. I mean, it's so rare in men that happens that it's unheard of. But then we drove underneath this giant triangle that was about 120 feet or so over the ground, and we drove right under it, and we're looking at it, and then I'm terrified, just like all of a sudden. I mean, I'm an infantry guy, so
Yep.
I was jumping out of airplanes and stuff. I wasn't scared of anything.
Right.
And until that thing happened. And that was it for me. She's hanging out the window looking at it. She's like, "Oh, it's got weird patterns on the bottom." And
Yeah, isn't that
and
interesting?
and I see it as and it has like a mirage, a heat mirage effect all around it, and like it's trying to cloak or do something, but it's just sitting there. And then 2:30 in the morning, and it's like, "You don't belong here. Get away. You don't belong." And I can't tell you what the voice was. I can hear it, but it came with emotion, like it purposely triggered my fear response.
Right.
So I went from being very inquisitive and being like, "Oh, it's not an airliner that's going to crash on top of us. What is this thing?" I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at these big lights. There's no lights on the ground, which there should have been because the damn lights in the corners were so bright, but they were not reaching the ground. Made
Right.
no sense. So I'm looking at this thing. I'm like, "That's not ours." She's like, "When did our military get something like that?" I'm like, "That's not ours. There's no way." And then it was like, "You don't belong here. Get away." And it was like instant terror, just instant terror. And I just gunned it and got the hell out of there. And then a couple months later, when the school year's starting, getting ready to start my first class and everything, and my hand is shaking so bad as I'm trying to write on the board. And I'm
Right.
just, I had to take 2 weeks off of teaching and then go back, and the kids were like, "What the hell happened to you?
Well,
Yeah, you
Wayne,
don't look the same."
there was somebody questioned me on and it was a TV program not too long ago, and they said, "What do you think about the brand new films that came out? They had these triangle craft over these aircraft carriers," and they said, "What do you think about all that? You believe it or not?" That's what belief is not. Has no relevance to me. Not about beliefs. What can I prove? I said, "It's not about belief. You can believe anything you want to." I said, "People come up to me and say, 'I don't believe in UFOs.' I said, 'I don't believe in the Great Wall of China.' Well, it exists. We got pictures." I said, "I got pictures of UFOs too." "Well, I don't believe in aliens." "Well, I got pictures of aliens." So that doesn't mean anything. What evidence do you have or not? So the lady pushed me on that issue. Said, "What do you think about the triangles?" I said, "Well, a lot of people that are seeing the UFO, the triangular craft and the tic tacs and have an interaction with them, even on board the craft, the aircraft carriers." I said, "Those are nuclear aircraft carriers." I said, they're ending up uh, with cancerous lesions in their brain in different parts of their body." I said, "I don't know if you know that." I said, I, I'm not, I'm not a whistleblower, and I'm not into that part of the business." I said, "But I said, anytime the government shows you a picture of a UFO and it's so fuzzy you can't even hardly make it out, you can barely make out it's a triangle." I said, "They've got equipment on board that nuclear carrier that can photograph the square inch of every one of those triangles. I guarantee you." I said, "I know what I'm talking about." I said, "Some of our people that work with us are DSP satellite specialists. Those are geosynchronous satellites that all point toward the Earth. and they see an infrared, ultraviolet, visible light. And they can read your watch if you stand still. It's that simple. That's not even classified. I said, here's my point. You're looking at these pictures, and I'm watching it on TV, seeing these fuzzy pictures of these triangle-like craft and with really crude night vision. I said, I'm just laughing. It's so stupid. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, I went to a friend of mine, and we talked about that. And he said, would you like to see the real stuff? I said, sure. He pulls out some of his equipment. We looked through it and looked at this film footage and so on. And at about 40,000 feet up, you can see these craft, and they in pretty good detail. I said, and it's absolutely amazing that he can do that with his equipment. And the United States government can't get anything but a fuzzy picture within 100 yards. I said, why do I think somebody's lying to me? I don't believe a word of it. I said, and you've seen some of the tech I have, I guarantee you. The government has more money than they know how to spend of your money, and they do it every year. And they have the finest of everything you can imagine. You can't even imagine some of it. When President Trump was saying the other day, he said, talked about different countries threatening us. Well, we could do that. We could blow up the world. He said, we've got stuff you don't even have a clue about. And I don't think he's lying in any sense of the word. I think he knows. And I think he's warning stupid people who don't have the equipment you do. You better pay attention. Because, I mean, when that man tells you them, he asked you, and he wants you to do things a nice way. If you don't do it, there's another way. And some boys out there sending drugs to us as fast as they can, fentanyl and everything else, are finding out those boats are, you better get some extra boats because you're running out. They're blowing up.
True. Yep.
Anyway, one other thing I want to tell you, if I may, about the alien being hatched, made, cloned, created. Because people, they wonder, where do you get all this weird stuff? Well, it's 40 years of research to begin with. I said, I asked somebody, they said, well, I don't believe words you're saying. I said, I don't care if you believe it. I said, I'm just asking you to think. Just think. It's okay. You can think different than me. I don't care about that. I said, when you look at the, I said, when I talked to my Native American buddies, medicine men and others, I said, tell me about the gray alien. When they look at me and they say, this is awful to have to say this, but I know them personally and we're friends, so I can do it. And I'm Native American as well, so I can get away with it. So they said, well, these are the star people. They come down from I said, don't feed me that crap. That's the stuff you tell white people. Tell me the truth. Oh, they come from inside the earth. Thank you. I said, so they come from here, huh? Yeah, and I said, okay, now that's just the grace. And let's look at the mantis. I said, where in the world would you get praying mantis DNA? Well, probably on Zeta Reticuli, they have 12-foot or 11-foot or 9-foot praying mantis beings. I said, where do you get DNA if you really wanted it for a praying mantis? I said, planet Earth's got several hundred species you can choose from. I said, where do you suppose you get Nordic, the so-called human Nordic alien DNA? Probably from, I'm going to take a wild guess here, Norway? Nordic, Norway. Yeah, that sounds close enough. I said, do you know that they did DNA testing on the Bigfoot? You know what they found? I said, the lady that did that, and that was in several years ago. And in fact, I offered to send them samples. I've had samples since the 1980s. I said, I've got a fingernail, a urine sample, and some hair samples. They said, we got plenty. I said, okay, just do whatever you need to do. I don't care. You know, I'm not here to prove anything. I don't care. I already know what I know. I've already know. I'm looking at my evidence. And anyway, they found two things about Bigfoot. Number one, it's an ape-like creature. Well, duh. I think we got that all figured out. That's number one. And the second thing they found, it had a second DNA, mitochondrial DNA, which is the female end of the story, and it was modern human woman. I said, do you know what modern human woman and Bigfoot DNA, what that means? It's called a transgenic. It's when you mix two species and come up with that. I said, so when you look at all that, and they said, well, what about the reptile? And I said, this one's going to sting a little bit. Okay, tell me. I said, I happen to believe the scripture is actually correct, and I'm a Christian. And I said, the first mention of a reptile alien, if that's what you want to call it, is in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. And it was there to destroy the human family, to split them from God, so to speak. I said, so that's not a whole lot different than what they're trying to do now. I said, they are doing everything they can to divide up people and they come up with these whopper stories that are so bizarre that it's heartbreaking to repeat some of them. But the point is that all these beings are made, hatched, cloned, and manufactured, in my opinion, these major players, and they're not from another planet. Us now, the guys who make, hatch, clone, and manufacture them, they probably are. And I said, in fact, I'm not even sure they're from another planet. So what do you mean? I said, well, we have something in the CIA called the tradecraft. And these are skill sets that are used. It's a spy school. Is where I was at. And in the tradecraft, you learn how to do all kinds of things, spying and doing all kinds of methods of spying and obtaining information. Well, I took one day in December 1991 and decided to apply my tradecraft to the alien. I thought I had enough information that I could do something. I didn't know if it'd work or not. I have no idea, but I'm going to try it just to see. And it worked. They ended up picking 8 of our people up on December 8th, 1992, and they picked them up 3 nights later on December 11th, 1992. And the usual lineup of the alien, the grays, and all of them are all lined up in front of this guy sitting in a big chair. He's from mid-level management, and yeah, he's still an alien. He's something like them. What's the point? The point is, everybody says, well, the gray's a different species, and this guy's a different species, and the Nordic's a different whatever. I said, give me a break. They were all there. All of them lined up, scared to death of the guy sitting in the big chair. And he's got my senior investigator standing in front of him. And he asked the question. He said, why did he do this? He said, I didn't know what in the world I was there for. And he said, but I knew instantly because the way they speak and communicate. He said, your name, your picture, everything about you came up. He said, I knew exactly what went down. He said, why in the world would you not tell me you did this? That's because you're an abductee, Dale. You'd tell him everything. He said, well, of course I would. I said, that's why I didn't tell him. Duh. But the point is that there are three primary things. Dale, that was my senior investigator. They figured if they got him, he would know everything. He didn't. And the lady I programmed to do this, she was in the other room with another guy from mid-level management, and he was asking her very similar questions. And Dale said, what was really strange, he said, when I told him I didn't know the answer to the question, said he was so furious. He said everybody in the lineup was shaking. They were scared to death they're going to die because he's got that kind of control over you. And he said the Nordic walked over. Dale's 6'2", and the Nordic's about 6'6", and he has to squat down a little bit and puts his hands on both sides of his face, looks into Dale's eyes with the big, beautiful blue eyes of this Nordic. He's so cute. And he looks back at the guy sitting in the big chair and he says, he's telling the truth. He doesn't know. And the guy cooled off. He realized Dale wasn't lying to him. Dale doesn't lie to anybody. The point is, he asked 3 questions that ought to just raise people's, if the story's true, and it's just a story because it can't prove it, but we do have some anecdotal evidence. We have more physical evidence that that case existed with 8 witnesses, all telling the same story, separated and not allowed to communicate until I got all the stories. All of them telling the same stories. Absolutely, we got more evidence in that case than we do in all the cases of our UFO work. It's unbelievable. Nails that came out of the, I mean, just physical evidence you couldn't believe everywhere. And then the alien, the mid-level management is what I call them. They asked this guy and the girl these 3 questions, and see if this has to do with any quote unquote UFO stuff we need to know about. He wanted to know, he said, first of all, he wanted to know how you did what you did. He said, I didn't even know what you did. He said, all I know is we all got picked up because of it. I said, okay. He said he wanted to know what Project Prometheus was. I said, Dale, Project Prometheus is a secret government project to study the alien, to steal their technology and use it for our military industrial complex. I said, why would they want to know about that, I wonder? Yeah. Second question. He asked the question. He said he produced a human brain in a holographic form in front of my face. And he leaned forward and he told Dale, point to the human soul. I said, Dale, did it bother you that they didn't know where it was at? I thought they knew everything. I said, everybody thinks they know everything because, like one lady said, Derrel, you're just so wrong about all this stuff. You just don't understand. They make spaceships. And I said, really? I said, who told you that? Well, they drive around. I said, you drive around the car. Did you build that car? I said, don't be stupid and talk to me. Act like you have a brain. I said, what makes you think he built that spaceship? Well, they had to. No, they don't have to. They have to drive it. I said, do you even know how it works? No. I said, well, maybe when he stays, I'll tell you. But my point is that the fact is that they don't, it doesn't work like you think. I said, so I said, you didn't build your house, you didn't build your car, you didn't build anything practically. Most people don't know how to do that. I said, my point to you is that somebody made it for them. Not them, somebody did. Well, they live on a planet with all these wonderful. I said, who told you that? Well, I'm just sure of it. I said, oh, okay, that's good that you're sure of it, but I have to have a little better substantiation than that. I said, I actually have seen the craft that Dale and them were on. You know how big it was? I said, they were all picked up in small craft in 2 states and several cities, all taken to this massive craft, which you would call a mothership. It was 50 miles thick and 600 miles across. Well, I'm not sure I believe that. I said, it don't matter what you believe. It matters what can I prove. A Japanese firm with telescopes were reviewing the moon at that time of the mass abduction, and they filmed a craft of massive size. We think it was the same one, but they were all on at the same time. And we accidentally got the film off of a TV program. I said, so if you were an alien, hatch, clone, made, manufactured, why would you want to live on the planet anyway? You don't. None of it makes any sense. I said, I've got several pictures, NASA-related pictures, and my own that show craft that are of immense size. Why would you need a planet when you've got craft that are so huge? You could move them anywhere you wanted, at any time you wanted, probably about any speed you wanted. I said, the things we believe about the alien may not even be remotely true. I said, you know what this reminds me of? Blade Runner, when you saw the movie Blade Runner, the replicants, and they all have these fake memories of their past life, and they always want these pictures of their mom and daddy and all that. They don't have mom and daddy. Neither do the aliens. I said, whoever made, hatch, clone, or manufactured them tells them, they tell them you came from Rosetta Reticuli, they'll believe it. Because if you don't believe it, the penalties are real severe if you don't do things right there. It's not like a society that you can't apply human stuff to these guys and assume we're all the same. They're just more advanced. As the fact is, they just got better tech than you do. That's all.
Well, look, Derrel, we're leaving a lot on the table, but we're going to have to wrap this up. It's getting late for us, and we've got to get up in a few hours to get the next school day going. But this has been amazing. We definitely would love to have you come back on. Like I said, there's stuff I wanted to ask you about the Animal Planet show where you guys did the uncovering aliens, and I've got so much here that we've got enough for a whole nother show to talk with you about. So hopefully we can get that all set up, and we'll get you back on maybe right after the first of the year if you're not too busy.
Be a lot of fun, and I love the questions from your guest tonight. Really good, well thought out questions. Very good.
Oh, our audience is on top of it, man. They are here every Sunday, and man, they do have some great questions, and a lot of them are experiencers. And yes. I was watching the chat, and when you were talking about this stuff, man, so many of them were like, I used to be afraid about talking about this stuff and thinking what people would think. And that's a really nice thing. I think that's going on now, is that people are able to come forward, and we have all these spaces out there available for them to come and hear the stories, know that they're not alone. Something is happening. We don't know what, which is the scary thing, because we don't understand, like you just said, the alien agenda and what they're up to is probably something we could never truly understand. And I wanted to ask you like about the spiritual ramifications of this and all that too. So we'll get you set up. We're going to get you back on here soon. Okay.
Very good. Lovely speaking with both of you. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Derrel.
Yeah. Thank you. We'll talk to you soon. Okay. Where's Michelle at?
I'm right here.
There you are. Okay. Well, everybody, we ran a little long tonight, but how could you not? I mean, the information was flowing, and Derrel Sims, the alien hunter, you can find his website. I'll put it in chat one more time. It's thealienhunter.com. Very simple. His email, you can find it there and contact him if you want to reach out. Man. Well, Michelle, what if they have a story they want to tell us after all that?
Send us an email at mi.ufo.podcast@gmail.com.
Yeah. And even if you want us to, like if you have guest suggestions and stuff for us to have people on, email those to us as well. I know some people put things in chat, but sometimes they get lost. With email, we'll have a digital copy and everything. Also,
but we'll definitely get Derrel back on.
Oh yeah, Derrel's coming. We're going to get him back on for sure. Also, if you want to support the podcast, you guys know what to do. The super thanks are always open. You can hit the links down below: Patreon, super chats, PayPal, all that good stuff.
And next week we talk about the trip to Zanesville, Ohio.
Michelle and I will be the guests next Sunday. And we're going to be talking about the Zanesville, Ohio trip to go see Benny and the Metal and show you guys some pictures and release a never heard story from him as we were driving around. Michelle was lucky enough to capture that. So make sure you guys are hitting that like button, leaving a comment below. And you can find the audio version of this probably by tomorrow evening. It'll be live on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and all those good places. All right, Michelle, everyone, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting. You guys mean the world to us. Special shout out to Caitlin and Ava and let's see, Sam out there. And all my other students that might be watching that think I'm some kind of rich celebrity or something.
And hi to my friend Lori, who's too afraid to say anything in chat.
That's right.
I know she's listening.
We've got a lot of lurkers from the school area. But with that being said, as always, remember, keep those eyes to what, Michelle?
The sky.
The sky.
Definitely the sky.
Definitely the sky. Later. Okay, which one? Man, I haven't done this in a while. Which button?